I hope that this is really productive for everyone and that you have a couple of good key takeaways to protect yourself from the consumer laws that you'll learn about in a little bit. Greg?
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. I know, like Dan said, the weather's been crazy late and everybody's probably sick of snow. I know I'm ready for winter to end. So thank you for attending. I'm really excited about this workshop because the idea actually came probably 4 or 5 months ago. I was talking to Sandy about it, that, it was an industry issue. A lot of lawsuits were coming about with customers of ours that had issues regarding what the topics we're going to talk about. And we really wanted to get the word out and get some awareness because it could really have a big impact on businesses. So I'm excited about it. And the goals for me today, what I'm going to talk about is just to let you know a little bit about what faulty workmanship is and its brief history and the concerns that focus on the green industry and why should you care about it. And then how can we help to protect you better, either financially, emotionally, and from a business side to lessen that impact. So those are the goals that I have. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking off of that, there's a difference between the consumer laws and faulty workmanship, and Greg and I are going to talk a lot about that, but they're also very related. But my goal is to provide some background on the consumer laws and how they affect you every single day. If you're doing work at someone's house, then it affects you. Also, I'm going to provide some examples of how these laws can protect you as well. And then finally, solutions. So, of course, we're going to scare the crap out of you and, make you be aware of these things. But at the end of the day, I want to get the point across that, hey, these are some things that you can do to try and protect yourself. So, disclaimer. So anything that we talk about today, it's not considered, legal advice. These are just suggestions. So that's kind of our CYA here for both Greg and myself. And so kind of jumping right into it. So before I get into the consumer laws itself, I'll kind of just give you a little bit of background. I have a great respect for people in the green industry. Like many of you, I started mowing lawns when I was 12 years old, going door to door. And that led into a fairly medium-sized landscape company that I owned for about 15 years. I had about 15 to 20 employees, the crews, and just like many of you are up this morning, I was out there salting and, working all those hours. So I have a great respect for everyone who's attending. And, moreover, I know a lot of what you're going through. And on the legal side, because I've been through it personally, I can, help people, better just because I've been going through it, have gone through it myself. Kind of the breaking point for me on a night, just like, many of these snowstorms, I was out plowing and we had a lot of banks that we plowed. And I was in the truck salting with the salt bed up. And if you know about banks, they have those overheads that you drive through for the teller. So all of you listening, you can probably guess what happened as I was salting and I forgot to put the bed down and I hit the bank. So after that...
Do we have to pay for that claim, Dan?
Yeah, in fact, you did the claim for me. That's right. That's right.
I remember that.
So I don't know if it was the breaking point, so to speak, but I kind of said to myself, hey, maybe I can help people out in the green industry in other ways. So I went to law school and here I am. So let's talk about contracts generally, just before we get to consumer law here. There's many different kinds of contracts. You can have an oral contract. Greg, if you said, hey, Dan, I will go ahead and give you your professional liability insurance for $2,000 a year. And if I accept it orally, that is a contract, okay? And when I was in landscape business, I did that a lot, depending on who the customer was. If I had a good relationship with them, I would do an oral contract. There's also contract by performance. So if you see something in the newspaper that says, hey, there's a $10,000 reward if you find my dog. Well, if you find the dog and return it, you fulfill the contract, and then you have to pay. And then finally, what we're most used to is a written contract. And of course, that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today is, what should be in your contract, and more importantly, addressing the consumer laws, because that's really what can mean business as usual to going out of business, okay? So here, looking at our slide here, when we're talking about the consumer laws, we're really talking about these two acts, the Home Solicitation Act and the Consumer Sales Practice Act. And many of you listening are like, I've never heard of this. I don't know, what you're talking about. But I bet you have. For example, if you've ever gone to get your car fixed, and you'll notice, at the dealer, and right on the back, it'll say, our hourly rate is such and such. And when you go to get your car in, and they always say, okay, I'm going to have you initial here and initial there, right? Every time they have you initial those two spots. They are following the consumer laws, and that's part of it. And what you're actually signing there, if you read the fine print, is it says that you have a right to an estimate, and we're going to give you an itemized estimate, and then you can accept it later. Those same laws affect you. If you do any sale at a residence, then you have to take part and understand these consumer laws, okay? So I'm going to do a poll. And go ahead and answer those as you see it on your computer if it does show up, okay? And I'll release the results in a minute. But yeah, if you go to someone's house and you give an estimate, just the mere fact of giving them the estimate there, then these laws apply. And the reason that it's so important is because of the bottom item there in red font, is if you don't comply with these laws, then you can get sued for 3 times the amount of the contract or 3 times the amount of damages, okay? So what are these laws? In general, they're laws that are meant to protect homeowners and consumers, to give them a cooling off period, okay? So as you could see, they've been around forever, from 1970s, and they originally came about from door-to-door vacuum salesmen, right? And I don't know about you, but my parents still have that Kirby vacuum, and it's the best vacuum. It'll out vacuum any Dyson that's on the market today, 50 years later, okay? But those door-to-door vacuum salesmen, they were pushy, and so these laws were meant to protect people. And so now every landscaper, every contractor, they fall under the same rules, okay? And as you can see on the slide here, they're not only can be a civil charge, but also criminal as well, okay? How I even came to know these laws. I got a call years ago when I was doing landscaping, and it was from a lawyer, and he says, hey, I need an estimate for this house. This pond is leaking or whatever. And so I went there, I talked to the homeowner, and this guy had just a beautiful pond. Pondless waterfall, and then a stream, and it opened up into this beautiful koi pond. And I asked the guy, what's the problem? Why am I here? And he says, my pond's leaking, and I spent $60,000 on this thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, all right. So after doing some investigation, I determined that the pond wasn't leaking at all. It was just evaporation. So on a hot, sunny week for a week, he might lose a 1/4 inch of water. Well, he, called the landscaper who did the work. The landscaper said the same thing that I did. And as many of you know, when one things go wrong, now customers start looking for a whole bunch of things. So then he said, well, this mulch is black and I really wanted red. And this rock over here is out of place. And he contacted an attorney who was the one who called me. And instead of suing for $60,000, he was suing for $180,000. And it was all because of the things that I'm going to show you in the next few slides, that the contractor did not follow the consumer laws, which opened the door to the 3 times damages. Okay. So the bottom line is these laws require you to provide consumers certain rights. So let's look at what those are. By the way, do you meet with customers at their house? 85% said that they do, and 86% and 14% that they don't. So if you don't meet with homeowners at their house, and the laws are a little bit different, if you are doing strictly commercial, this does not apply. It is only for home sales. Okay, the laws are different if you're doing only commercial. So, Home Solicitations Act, common violations. Notice of cancellation. So in all of your contracts, you have to have something that's called notice of cancellation. And this is otherwise known as the 3-day rule. And what that is, that's the cooling off period that I talked about before. You have to have, and it's statutory language, right? It's too long for me to put in a slide, and it has to be verbatim, word for word. And basically it says that they have 3 days to cancel the contract. And if you don't provide this, the customer can cancel your contract even after the work has been done. That sounds crazy, right? So that pond example that I gave you, I went to go and give an estimate to fix the pond, which I ended up not doing because the pond was fine. That customer canceled the contract with the contractor, even though he did the work. That's the law. Now you might be sitting there saying, well, what about all the work that I put in? That's a counterclaim, and the contractor will say, hey, I'm suing you for unjust enrichment. I enriched your house and you owe me $60,000. Fine. But as a contractor, you don't have that 3 times damages protection like the homeowner does. Okay, and that's where it really hurts you. So that 3-day rule, that's a must. You want to have it in bold that you have a right to cancel this contract, literally that sentence verbatim, in bold right beneath where the homeowner is going to sign the contract. And then you need to attach separately a little sheet where they would sign it and mail it in to say, hey, we're canceling it. It's also important to note that it needs to be in duplicate. What I mean by that is you actually should have a carbon copy of the right to cancel so that they send it into you and they keep a copy for themselves. Okay. So this law also deals with refunds, post-completion. So if you do offer refunds, you have to make sure that you spell that out within your contract. If you don't do any of these, then it does become a violation. And what's a violation? $200 a piece is what the court will slap on you. Okay. Hi, Sandy. Any questions so far?
Yes. Jim would like to know, what happens if it's a verbal contract? Do you have to verbally give that same 3-day notice?
Great question. So I'm going to go to my next slide. So you might have a contract if it's in writing, or if it's oral. But if it's not in writing, then that's another violation. So Jim, that's a great question. You could have a oral contract, that's a violation, but you still, yes, would have to provide the 3-day cancellation, and you can't provide it if it's oral. So in essence, you need to have it in writing, okay? Really, this really comes into play when something goes wrong. And that's really the link between what Greg is talking about and what I'm talking about today. Never once and ever have I gone and done a job or had a client, whether it be a homeowner or a contractor, where in the back of their mind, they knew the consumer laws, and where a homeowner would say, oh, you didn't give me the right to cancellation. And at the end of the job, the guy says, I'm not paying you. That's not where it comes up. Where this comes up is where you do a job for a homeowner, and for some reason, it doesn't matter what that reason is, they're unhappy. In the example that I gave, the homeowner was unhappy because of the color of the mulch. That homeowner then calls an attorney and says, hey, this is what's going on. That attorney informs them of their rights. And then can you imagine being the homeowner on the other end of it? Oh, well, he didn't give me that. You mean I can sue for 3 times the cost? Wow. And you can imagine what happens then. So go ahead, Sandy.
Andrew would like to know how this applies if you meet with the client at home, but then email them the proposal and contract.
You can do that. And actually the laws have changed slightly. So you can email them a contract, and you just have to be sure that all of these things that we're talking about today, that you include them. And that's fine. So like the 3-day rule, it can be through your digital contract, and make sure that, you know, they've received it, and that's totally fine. So that's acceptable.
It would be 3 days from the time you send them the proposal?
From the time they sign it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So when we're talking about the CSPA, Consumer Sales Practices Act, here's some other things that you want to make sure that you're aware of. Again, that the contract is written, okay? Deposits, got to make sure that you record each and every payment, all right? Each of these is a violation. Receipts, always give a receipt, let them know what the receipt is for. Cost breakdowns, this is the biggest one that people skip, and it gets them in trouble. You cannot do an estimate and say, hey, your cost to build this patio is $10,800. All labor and whatever is included. The same way that your mechanic breaks down each and every part and each and every labor hour that goes into the estimate for your car or your truck is the same thing that you have to do for estimates for your clients. And I know that half of you are like, ugh, it's a pain in the butt. And I've heard feedback sometimes from clients that say, well, I don't want to show them how much I'm charging in labor. Honestly, for those who actually do show the customer and break it out, 100% of the time, the feedback that I've gotten from clients, including my own, is that they appreciate that it's broken out. When you go to the mechanic and it's $110 an hour, I mean, it's $110 an hour. It is what it is. Your cost is going to be in the ballpark of your competitors, whether it's, you know, 10,000, 11,000 or what have you, and your homeowner is going to appreciate a lot more that everything is itemized. And not only should they appreciate it, it's the law. Go ahead.
Dan, if they include the amount of hours on the if you include the amount of hours on the estimate, will homeowners be kind of watching your employees as they work and say, well, you charged me for 10 hours, but I saw that they only took 8 hours. Does that ever come up?
That comes up all the time. So what, and you know, part of, I understand that, you know, I'm giving you the letter of the law unofficially for contracts, but a lot of this is being practical too. So you want to make sure that you communicate, because this comes up a lot. You want to make sure that you communicate to the homeowner, hey, I have itemized this as kind of a starting point, as an estimate of what this job's going to cost. If you'll notice that it has 20 hours of us excavating, man hours of excavating for this patio. If it takes us 22 hours, you're not going to owe us extra money. But if it takes us 18 hours, we're not going to deduct money either. So you want to have in your contract, and I recommend verbalizing this to your customer, that it's by the job. You know, when you go to the mechanic, they're not going to charge you, well, some of them will, they're not going to charge you extra labor hours than what was actually done. And they can't. You can't do that by law. All right. And so the same, in the same sense, you're not going to reduce your rate either. Okay. But, and Gray, that's a good question. I've never, if you address that up front, I have never had a client, I've never experienced it personally, where a customer said, hey, you know, it only took you half the amount of time than what you estimated. Well, so what? You know, we said it was by the job. So,
Dan, do you have a follow-up question? if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Andrew wants to know how long after you complete the work do they have to cancel the contract? But if you had a contract and you gave them the 3 days, that doesn't matter, right?
Anytime. So if you gave them the 3-day right to cancel, then they up to 10 years, because the contract law is 10 years. So if you did not give them the right to cancel, 5 years goes by and they're unhappy with the work. We talk about statute of limitations. Let's say that you did a retaining wall and it failed 5 years later. You didn't have the right language in your contract. They can cancel it 5 years later.
Oh, they can come after you 5 years later?
Yes.
Wow.
And they
I didn't know that.
Three times the cost to fix it. So,
Wow.
Yep. I've got, and for anyone who's interested, I've got case after case after case. I don't sue contractors. I represent them, but I have, obviously, I'm friends with a lot of attorneys who do. And, today in preparing for this, I was kind of just looking at some cases, and I found one that my friend represented. And he represented the homeowner against a home builder, because these laws also apply to a home builder. And the cost to build the house was $400,000. And he got all $1.2 million, 3 times the cost, because that home builder did not follow the laws. So.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. So the final things that you want to make sure that you include as part of our solutions here today, additional work. So everyone knows about this typically. If you're going to have additional things, you want to make sure that you spell that out in your contract, that, hey, it's a change order or what have you. A lot of us are familiar with that. Finally, subcontracting, another violation. So you want to make sure that you are letting them know that, hey, I have a plumber, and this is who they are, and they're going to be doing the sprinkler, the backflow preventer, on the outs for the sprinkler system. Okay. So before I turn this over to Greg, just one thing I want to point out is, so these laws here that we're dealing with on this page, these are violations, and these get you, in trouble. All right, $200 a piece, and it just adds on to the lawsuit. All right. But over here, these laws, the 3-day rule, this one's really the one that if you don't provide that, that's what opens the door to 3 times damages in the lawsuit. Okay. And so as I kick this over to Greg, I'm just going to do another poll. Here, anyone is welcome to borrow this book on the consumer laws. And I'm doing my best to, and here's how thick it is, doing my best to simplify this in our presentation today. And
That's probably worse to read than an insurance policy, Dan.
I don't know about that, Greg. It comes pretty close.
Both of them put you to sleep.
But, it's a good idea to have your contracts reviewed by myself or another attorney, because it can really save you a lot. So I'm going to send out a poll here as I kick this over to Greg to talk about the faulty workmanship. Go ahead, Greg.
Thanks, Dan. I do have one other question for you, just because you were talking about the 10 years limitation. Most of the client claims that I've been involved in are for design build projects. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking while you were talking have you ever seen or have you read about a contractor being sued for a maintenance contract 5 or 10 years later for, not having it in their maintenance versus a retaining wall or a patio?
I haven't seen anything 5 or 10 years later for maintenance, but these same rules do apply for maintenance contracts. So you do want to make sure that even if you're cutting a lawn, that you provide receipts, provide the right to cancel. And if you could still have, auto renew contracts, that's fine, but you still have to give them a 3-day notice in that contract.
Okay. I was curious about that. Because we usually talk about from the design build standpoint is where you're going to see the most likely to have a lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's most likely going to happen in design build where somebody screws up. It's rare that I've seen cases in maintenance, but I guess my point is, you know, on a legal level, yes, it applies. Practically, right. It's very rare that someone's going to sue. Where I have seen it in the maintenance is where fertilizing and someone burns out a lawn. And in fact, I was on a case a few years ago down in Lodi, and I was an expert witness. But anyway, this company, a very well-known, every person on this would know this company, and they burned out a lawn. And this woman, you know, of course, she had pictures of her lawn when it was so lush and green and whatever. And this company actually tried to fix it and make it right, but she just wanted the money, you know, and she got it. Because her lawn, I told her, your lawn looks fine to me, but it does come up in maintenance sometimes.
All right.
So Greg, we're on this slide for faulty workmanship, and okay. I'll let you take that away.
Okay, perfect. I think I advanced too far. Okay, thanks, Dan. A lot of good information there. So what I wanted to talk about is, you know, what is faulty workmanship and what is faulty workmanship insurance, and a little bit of history on that and why is it necessary. So we just spent several minutes on contractors that have had mishaps and screw-ups, and unfortunately, being in the insurance business and focusing on contractors for almost 30 years now, this October, we've seen a lot of screw-ups, whether it's from the owner of the company or the employees. So a lot of times we're not overseeing those employees, you know, 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day. So we all know they screw up, and we need remedies to get things fixed and to avoid lawsuits. So errors and omissions, the definition of errors and omissions is pretty straightforward. So what errors and omissions insurance is insurance to cover, I don't want to say everything, but things that are as a result of your workmanship. And the history on this is it really only became available about 5 years ago, and still a lot of insurance companies out in the marketplace do not even offer the errors and omissions from a design build standpoint. A lot do more than ever, but a lot still don't. So it only really became available in the last 5 years. It's often referred to as errors and omissions insurance, and you know the cost could range anywhere from $300 a year to $1,500 a year or more if the insurance company offers it. Common limits are anywhere from $100,000 per claim to $1 million per claim. I'd say the most average limits that we see as an agency who insures over 400 contractors is about $300,000 of coverage. The largest claim we've ever been involved in with a client is over $160,000. So it can get up there. And then there is a difference between errors and omissions for design build work and errors and omissions for the Department of Agriculture compliance. If you are a contractor and you are licensed with the Department of Agriculture, you need errors and omissions insurance to cover that burnt out lawn that Dan was just talking about. That's been a law, I think now just 3 or 4 years. So there's a specific endorsement that you need to include for that type of errors and omissions for applying pesticides and herbicides. But there's also an additional endorsement that you would need to buy to cover the design build work. Some insurance companies put them all together to cover both pesticide applications and design build. Some will do it separate, some won't do it at all. So you really need to talk to your insurance advisor and make sure you've got the right type of coverage. So why is this necessary? It's necessary because the standard liability insurance form does not typically cover your workmanship, like a warranty. And most insurance companies up until 5 years ago did not cover warranties or workmanship. So this is a special endorsement you need to add. Most insurance companies also do not actually cover the violations against Consumer Sales Practices Act. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in some slides later in the presentation, but it's necessary to buy these special coverages because they're excluded from your standard insurance general liability policy. And if you have a claim, unfortunately, you would not be covered unless you have these endorsements. So we'll talk more about that. Okay.
Thanks, Greg. I just wanted to point out, if anyone hadn't noticed, Dan wrote in the chat box what the outcome of that poll was. So you can take a look at the chat box for that.
Thanks. All right. Greg, all set on faulty workmanship?
I am, unless you have anything to add.
So I just set another poll out. Has an employee ever committed faulty workmanship? I myself have committed faulty workmanship. Built a retaining wall in, God, what city was that? Like Monroe Falls, I think it was. And anyway, was using Brussels block or Brussels dimensional, right? Standard. And it was only 1.5 feet tall. And I didn't taper the wall back. This is only 1.5 feet tall. Put the drain pipe in, put the gravel behind it, and sure enough, the homeowner put like 1.5 feet of topsoil on top and mounted it like this. So sure enough, the wall failed. So we redid it. And this time I did taper it back 3/4 inch per layer. Same thing happened. So then the next time I put 3 feet of geogrid in it, and now to this day I don't think it's failed. But third time's a charm. Even myself and following the specs of Unilex guides, things happen. And fortunately, I was never sued for consumer law. But that scenario would be a classic example of a homeowner being upset, calling an attorney, and then all of a sudden, instead of me fixing it, I would have been, paying someone else 3 times the amount to fix it. Okay. Go ahead, Sandy.
We are going to get into some more examples here in a little bit, but yeah, the retaining wall incident or example, Dan, is very common, as well as other types of cracks in patios and tall fireplaces. Those are the most common types of claims that we see with this situation.
Yep.
Kind of going back to that poll, Dan, what interval would you recommend people to consult with an attorney and have their contract reviewed?
So I would leave it up to the attorney. In general, once a year, but here's the thing. I mean, for my clients, I call them. Recently a big change was that you can now do the 3-day rule digitally. And before, it had to be carbon copy in their hand. So, I mean, my advice is to establish a relationship with someone and, let the attorney be the one and make sure that you talk to someone who, will follow up on these things to keep you up to date. With my clients, I probably reach out, I mean, depending on who the client is, if even clients that I don't have a real great personal relationship with, I probably contact them 2 or 3 times a year. The payroll protection loan, right? I mean, that was something that was very hot topic that I was contacting clients. I'm not going to wait for them to call me. But specifically to contracts, probably once a year. And I'm not saying that the laws change once a year. On average, I might be making a major implementation maybe every 3 years, but you just don't know. So, last year I did a contract for a client, and the next week the law changed, so I had to call him back. Okay. So it really just depends. Why should I care about these laws?
I'd like to add, Dan, that I think the timing of this webinar is perfect because a lot of companies are going to be starting design build projects here this spring, and now is a good time between snowstorms, if we ever get a break between snowstorms, to talk to their attorney or give you a call, Dan, personally, and go over the contract because they want to be ready, come April or May before they really get into the heart of the design build season and they're too busy to think about it.
Right. No, exactly. So,
we do have another question from Dave. He would like to know what the average cost you could expect to pay an attorney to review your contract.
It depends. For me personally, to sit down and review someone's contract, it's free. But for me to implement it, it would be on a flat fee basis to say, hey, this is what you need to get you started. And then from there on, if there's additional changes, we'll make them. But it is, at least for me, an initial 1 hour consult is free, and then it'll be flat fee after that. So, but it really just depends. Sometimes it's almost sometimes easier for me to draft a contract from scratch than it is to actually, slice apart someone's existing. But also, I understand that clients have certain things that are important to them that they want to, maintain in their contracts. So it's really a collaborative effort that I couldn't put, a single cost on it. But I could say that at least for me, it's a flat fee.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. So I've already touched on this, why should you care? And if you commit a deceptive act and in the eyes of the law, not providing that 3-day rule is a deceptive act, and it can be the 3 times the damages and that they can cancel the contract at any time, okay? That's why my clients should care. Greg, why should your clients care?
Well, my clients should care because every year we see more and more of these types of claims, and that's why we're having this webinar. Because a lot of my clients, when I'm talking to them about it, don't know what consumer sales practices is, and they're just shocked that they can be sued for 3 times the value of the job. I mean, some very large, sizable contractors that you think would know about it that I've talked to over the last couple of years don't know about it. So we're trying to get the word out as much as possible. So it's concerning from that end. And it's also going to be, money well spent, to see an attorney because you're going to save on potential large payouts for attorneys and fees if there is a claim. You're going to save a lot of stress. I'm sure any lawsuit is not a pleasant situation, and you're going to have stress in dealing with the lawsuit if one comes about. And so there's financial stress there as well. And then the business relationship. You've got a good client that you do a really big job for, and we've seen it time and time again or heard about it time and time again from our clients. You're doing a big job and there's a problem and they sue you. Well, that's a strained business relationship. So you're gonna, it should be important to you because there's a financial impact, there's an emotional impact with the stress, and there's a financial or a business impact because you could lose a big client. And we've typically seen claims as low as $10,000 for just to replace a patio that had some cracks in it because the underlying concrete or whatever base wasn't thick enough and it cracked the concrete. And like I mentioned before, we've seen one up to over $200,000 with defense costs. So I think the homeowner got $160,000 paid to them, but with defense costs, it was well over $200,000. So that's a big financial impact. And paying an attorney, couple $1,000 or $5,000 or even $10,000 is worth all those other things we just mentioned. It's a good investment, I would think.
So Greg, your office would like you to address something, and that is...
Oh, I'm in trouble. No, they can't have raises.
If a contractor buys the faulty workmanship coverage now, will that policy cover any past projects that have been completed already?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sue and Terry. Thank you. Most of the faulty workmanship coverages are written so that they will cover claims that happen during the policy period, as long as the faulty work or the cracking or the damage was done during the was done during the policy period. So if we took out a policy here this year and you did the work in August and a claim happened in October, it was during the policy period, you would be covered. Okay, but if you did the work in prior to the policy, obviously it would not be covered. Even though the claim was presented during the policy period when you had the insurance, if the work was done before, it would not be covered under the current term, even though you had the coverage at the time. So that's typically how most insurance companies work. The work has to be done and the claim has to be done during the policy period. If the work was done before, it would not be. It's called a claims made policy. If you want some more details on that, shoot me an email or give me a phone call. It's a little confusing.
We have another question. Should there be a lawsuit resulting from one of these contract deficiencies and we're sued and the homeowner wins, are we going to be responsible to pay the damages, or would the insurance company cover it?
That's a good question, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. But I can answer the question now and just go over it a little bit later. But the insurance is only going to cover the faulty workmanship claim. If in the lawsuits, if they're alleging both faulty workmanship and Consumer Sales Practices Act, they're never going to cover the Consumer Sales Practices Act violation. But what happens is they use the Consumer Sales Practices Act violation to increase the award for the faulty workmanship. So let's say the damage done by the patio being cracked was $20,000 to replace, but the Consumer Sales Practices Act could be 3 times that, or 3 times the contract. A lot of attorneys will use that as leverage to get that faulty workmanship claim increased to usually cover up to the total cost of the job. So they use that as leverage, but the actual insurance contract does not cover the Consumer Sales Practices Act violation in the lawsuit. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So I'm just going to I know I've given some real life examples of my own and then of clients. This one is just kind of really hit it home, and it's kind of generic, but this is exactly how this works, at least on my end with the consumer laws. So here you have contractor, perfect construction, bids a home construction project for $250,000. It's a written contract. The homeowner accepts it, signs a standard contract. Work is to begin on a certain date. All the payments are made on time, and the job's done. And this contractor never gave the 3-day rule. Homeowner writes back and says, "Hey, dear Perfect Construction, everything's great. We love it. Everything's good. But please return our money back within 10 days. P.S. Seriously, we really love the work." And I know this is kind of, a comical example, but this is exactly how, it works. And this is real life. Here's what happens. The contractor refuses to refund and isn't nice about it. Homeowners sue under the laws, and they're seeking $750,000 plus punitive plus attorney fees. Who wins? Of course, the homeowner wins. Here's a little side note. If you don't get paid on a job, please do not run and place a lien on the house. Okay? there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that. First off, they're going to countersue if you don't do your lien correctly. And secondly, if they get a notice in the mail saying that there's a lien on their house, the first thing they're going to do is call an attorney. And then that's when they're going to learn about the consumer laws. So just be really careful about that.
That's funny you mentioned that, Dan, because I hear that all the time. Somebody didn't pay one of our clients, and the first thing they do is they go file a lien. So you're saying do not do that because you
are rolling the dice. You are rolling the dice.
Cause another lawsuit and
if you have all these things in place, then fine, you're good. Go ahead and place the lien. But if you haven't followed the consumer laws, you are really rolling the dice because, just think about it. If you're a homeowner and now there's a lien on your house, you're ticked off. And the first thing you're going to do is call an attorney. So, and that's what's going to open the doors. If you're protected already, then sure, yeah, you can go ahead and place your lien, but you better be sure that you followed everything to a T. So
if you're not protected or you don't think your contracts have been reviewed by an attorney, you think you should just try to settle for less money and try to get as much money as you can, or walk away, or what happens then?
It's all situational, but yeah, obviously you'd want to talk to someone to review things first. If you're already in a situation, then obviously you want to mitigate your damages as much as you possibly can. So, and Greg, here's your example on the faulty workmanship.
Okay. We've had situations before, and it looks like I forgot a zero there, but customers, landscapers hired to put in a paver patio with a fireplace and a pergola. The cost of the job was around $150,000. Employee doesn't pour the concrete footer thick enough, as I kind of mentioned before, and from the support of the weight of the pavers in the outdoor fireplace and the pergola, there multiple cracking resulted. So lawsuit resulted. It went from a $20,000 claim that tried to get resolved. Well, it went from a $2,000 claim and then to a $20,000 claim, and then an attorney got involved because the customer didn't want to settle, and then it ended up paying about $150,000 to $160,000, like I said before. But technically, that client could have been sued for $450,000 under the Consumer Sales Practices Act, and that was mentioned in the lawsuit. And that's, like I said before, that's why it went from a $2,000 claim to a $20,000 claim to over $150,000, $160,000 claim before the attorney's fees to get it settled, because they were using the Consumer Sales Practices Act wording in the lawsuit as leverage to bring up the faulty workmanship amount. I already touched on this example. Thanks for moving that, Dan. I appreciate it. Same thing. It was actually, go back one here. Yep. A simple patio, $15,000 patio got put in, and hot weather caused some flaking and cracking, and they sued. And again, it could have been a $45,000 claim. It was settled for less than that, but again, 3 times the job for a simple concrete patio work. So crazy situations happen like that, even on small jobs and big jobs. And you just have to make sure your contracts are right, and you know what insurance you have, because it could come back and backfire on you. Okay, so I touched on this a lot. I'm not gonna go through each of these, but general liability is excluded for the Consumer Sales Practices Act, so you don't have any coverage for that. And you'd be responsible for hiring your own attorney if it did turn out to be not settled by the insurance company. So you have insurance, they're settling the claim, but then it is ruled that there is a Consumer Sales Practices Act, then you would need to get an attorney involved either right from the beginning or at that point to take over that portion of the demand. So there could potentially be 2 attorneys or 3 attorneys on one case.
Go ahead.
Like I said, the insurance will only defend the faulty work allegations. They use but the attorneys use that as leverage to bring up the claim award. And typically the insurance company will only pay up to the limit of coverage. But like I said, that the homeowner would be responsible for any Consumer Sales Practices Act violations. So that's a very important, the differences between faulty workmanship and Consumer Sales Practices Act are outlined right there. One's insurable and one's not.
So I already went over all the things that you should have in your contract, and just a couple other tidbits here. When you're actually doing the estimate itself, you are required, just as you are initialing when you go to get your car fixed, same thing. So you actually have to have the homeowner sign this where it says verbatim, you have the right to an estimate. Which would you like? That same thing that you do at the auto dealer when you initial, same thing. And I recommend a carbon copy and have one that the homeowner keeps and that you keep. This is not going to bring in the three times damages rule, but it's just another thing that to protect yourself, so you're not, in the event that you do get sued, that you're not dinging another $200. Go ahead, Sandy.
Can you, is it okay to still do time and materials? So it's sort of thing like where we don't know how much time, so we'll just bill you accordingly, or do you really need a dollar number?
That's a good question. That's kind of a gray area, and I don't recommend time and materials personally. And actually, you were just leading up to my next slide, which this is really what your estimate should look like. But we're all possible. I would recommend that you try, estimate it up front. Time and materials is tough. You're really walking into some trouble there. Here's what your estimate should look like. You'll notice that, hey, excavation and patio, 8 man hours, it's $85 per hour. Here's your total. And that's your labor. And actually this estimate, I recommend that you do break it out into materials and labor and have it just organized in that way. This one isn't. So maybe it's not a perfect example, but it does, here, step wall pillar installation, 58. Here's what you don't want to do. Grill island, $8,000 to $11,000. This is a no-no. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're spelling it out. Okay. Here's another big one. This is a use it or lose it. Okay. Right to cure. You want to make sure there's a clause. It's called right to cure. You want to make sure that you have that in your contract, because if you don't, the homeowner does not have to let you come back to fix your faulty workmanship. So if you mess up a job and they cancel the contract on you because you didn't follow the three-day rule, or even if you did follow the 3-day rule, if you don't have the right to cure, they can just go and find someone else and they can fire you on the spot. If you do have the right to cure in your contract, they cannot go and hire another contractor to fix your job. They have to give you the opportunity to remedy the job. So this is, really important that you have this language, because otherwise, like in my example, I went back and fixed that retaining wall that we messed up twice. But if I didn't have the right to cure in my contract, and in that example, everything was fine. I was communicating with the client and they were nice about it. But if they weren't, and I didn't have that, they could have just found someone else. And if I were the other contractor on the other side, I obviously would have charged a lot more, knowing that the other contractor is out of luck, right? So
that's what happens. Usually in a claim situation, they know they need to get it fixed, and they're charging sometimes 2 to 3 times what the original job was.
Yep.
Getting some feedback here.
So here's some other ways to protect yourself, Greg, on the workmanship.
Make sure that you call an attorney, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, to review your contracts before your design build season starts in the spring. This is a great opportunity to pull it out and ship it off to an attorney, or give Dan a call. He's the expert. He's a contractor, owns a landscape company for a long time. So,
or I'll give you the book. You have the book.
So seek professional help for your contract review. Consider errors and omissions and faulty workmanship covered. It's pretty inexpensive, like we discussed, $300 to $1,500 if it's offered by your insurance carrier. Discuss your coverage with your agent or an expert in the industry to make sure you're protected if something does happen. Hopefully your contract will guarantee that nothing does happen, but if it does, then you'll need somebody to help protect you. So make sure you're in good hands with that.
So conclusion on my part, and I'll bring it all home. When you're meeting, this whole thing is a process. Okay, that's what I want everyone to understand. It's not just, oh, I've got this in my contract and I'm good to go. It's all a process. When you first meet with the client, make sure you have them have the right to an estimate. When you're providing the estimate itself, make sure that it's itemized. If you do engage with the client to do the work, make sure that your contract includes all of the items that we talked about today. Specifically, most importantly, the 3-day right to cancel. Make sure you provide receipts. Make sure you record deposits and let them know. Right to cure. And if you're doing all of these things, then you're ahead of the game. At the end of the day, if somebody does screw something up, that you're not going to be on the hook for 3 times to fix it. Greg?
And I would add to that, Dan, that it's going to make, if it does turn into a claim and you have insurance for it, it's going to make a claims adjuster's job a lot easier to settle or deny, hopefully deny, if all that documentation is in place. And I spoke to a claims adjuster for one of our insurance carriers last week before the webinar, and she said the most important thing that she could advise or recommend is that contractors have a good contract and they document all the change orders, and nothing's verbal. It all has to be in writing, and that would make everything a lot easier from the claims process, a lot smoother, and hopefully enough to deny legal liability on your part. So review your contracts, like we've talked about several times today. Review your insurance and know what coverage that you have and don't have.
Great. If anyone has questions, our contact information is here. My email is there. Greg's email is there. And feel free to reach out to me anytime. And obviously, feel free to reach out to Greg. And I think that's everything we have here. I'm looking to see if there's any questions over here.
Have you ever seen, or do you think there's any, now that we're in winter and, we're between snowstorms, is there any, have you ever heard of any faulty workmanship claims with snow at all, or contractual things with snow, Dan? Or I know we talked, you should still have it, but have you ever seen any of the snow?
Yeah, that actually usually falls more on your side when somebody hits something or, so not so much faulty workmanship there. It's more of, lawsuits because something got damaged.
Gotcha.
So.
Perfect. Any more questions, Sandy, from the audience?
Yes, we do have a question from Brian. In their contracts, they have very detailed materials and description of work to be completed, but they don't show the labor breakouts. Does that, for some reason, put them at risk?
It's a violation, yeah. So is that particular violation going to cost you 3 times the amount? No. But it doesn't look good, especially to a judge, because it looks like you're hiding something. but it is a violation. So my question to you, Brian, would be, how did you come up with that number? Because at least for me, whether I'm estimating a legal, if I'm estimating to do your contract and I give you a flat fee, it's really the amount of hours that I think that it's going to take me to complete that. And that's how I came up with the number. I keep coming back to this auto example. Same thing. You really do want to break it out and say it's 7.5 hours to install this topsoil. And really, in my experience, breaking it out when I was doing estimates for landscaping, it actually helped me. Not only was it better for the customer, but it actually helped me understand where my labor costs were instead of just doing, a lump sum number. And I actually found I should be charging more for this. There's no way it only takes 8 hours to excavate a patio, that's this big. So
I would imagine too that a lot of times a client doesn't realize how long something takes. And they might look at it and say, "Are you crazy?" But then when you say, "But wait a minute, that's 20 hours or whatever it is."
Then it's man hours. So if you have 3 guys, I've had that in the past. You mean to tell me that it's going to take 42 hours to lay these bricks in? Yes, it will. With 4 guys in a day and a half, it's going to take 42 hours to lay 500 square feet of pavers in. Yes. So, and they don't understand. So, and sometimes you have to educate, educate the customer on the job and how long it's going to take. So,
right.
They need to focus on the end results with the beautiful patio versus how much it's going to cost to put it in, right? And how many specific hours it's going to take.
Yep. I used to cringe anytime someone would say, "Oh, I saw this on HGTV." And I knew that was going to be a terrible experience. Quick story: my sister lived in Chicago, and she was on one of those shows, right? And it was I don't remember the name of the show, but it was the one where you switched houses or whatever with your neighbor, and everything had to get done within 48 hours or whatever, right? It did not. So they portrayed this on the show. She said it took them 2 months to get the work done.
Oh,
but on the show, it says that it was 2 days or whatever, a week.
Right.
And so for all of us watching and for all of the customers that we serve, they're like, "Oh,
instant,
I saw on HGTV. It only took a day to put in a patio. 1 day makeover. What do you mean it's going to take a week?"
Right.
For my built-in grill with granite that you have to cut yourself, and So.
Yeah. So we have another question. For some residential jobs for home builders, we are signing the customers or the prime contractor's contract, not our own. How is this a liability for us in this instance?
So it depends. If you're working for the home builder specifically, then that's your customer, and that's business to business. So these laws don't apply. So they have to be the ones that are providing this information to the homeowner, and that home builder should be following all these laws, and they better specifically name you as the contractor. However, if you start engaging with the homeowner, then that opens the doors to these laws. So, and it's a little bit of a gray area, but to cover yourself, I would not only give, the home builder is going to have a budget number for the homeowner, right? And they might say, you get 10 grand to have a lawn installed and 25 shrubs and 2 trees and mulch, right? If you're engaging with the homeowner, then I would give them an itemization and I would follow all of these things just to cover yourself. But if you're not engaging with the homeowner at all, then your contract is with the builder, not the homeowner.
Dan, in that situation, does it make it even more important not only to have the general to have the good contract, but for you to have a written subcontract agreement?
Oh yeah.
With the general contractor, because subcontractor agreements are another important part of the industry right now, and that's something that should be, I wanted to add to that if you're working for that general contractor, you need to make darn sure that you have a separate sub agreement with them, a signed written agreement saying that you are a sub and you're not an employee or you're not working directly for the homeowner.
Yes, and typically the builder would have those, but I will tell you that the number one call or matter that I discuss is general contractor and subcontractor, and typically it's the subs calling me and they're saying, I never got paid. That's the number one thing. And then, so what's your remedy to go after the general? Well, if you are business to business, there's no personal assets tied. And generals, they screw over the subs all the time. So and that's a totally different webinar, but
next month.
You want to make sure that you're protected, and there's a lot of things to consider in that example, and especially on the insurance side too. What if you're subbing things out, if you're working for someone else, to spell out what you're responsible for, what they're responsible for, and make sure that everyone has insurance. I'll tell you, I'll be the first to tell you, when I was young and I was 19, 20 years old, and I was doing all these huge condo associations and these big projects, and I had subs, and I was dumb, and I didn't check in to make sure that they had insurance or what have you. Accidents happened, and the person that it fell on was me. I had to pay for their screw ups because what do? They ghost you, right? They're gone. Your subcontractors are gone, and you have no remedy. So it's imperative that you get your insurance in line with subs and generals, and that you have your subcontractor agreements. But yeah, I could go on for another hour on that. But
yeah, that is another topic. But I will add to that a big, not our main concern, but a very big concern is our clients that are working as subcontractors for somebody else, and they call and they need a certificate to be naming somebody who they're working for as an additional insured on a certificate, and there's no written contract in force. And technically speaking, if there's not a written subcontractor agreement in force, there is no coverage for that additional insured who they're working for as additional insured. So it's a huge issue, and again, big and small contractors don't know. So companies that have been in business for a long time, it's sometimes it's news to them. So it's very important to have subcontractor agreements, that are valid.
Dan,
whether you're working for somebody or whether somebody's working for you, both sides, it applies to both sides.
Yeah.
So Dan, if you are a subcontractor for a general, do you recommend that they your clients show you the contract before they sign it? Is that a problem?
No, not necessarily. Because if there's a lawsuit, it's not your responsibility to look at the general's contractor with the homeowner. But it is your responsibility to follow the laws if you're engaging with the homeowner. So, why should you have to pay a lawyer or even take your time to review the general's contract with the homeowner? That's their business. But you certainly want to make sure that you're taking the time to review and understand your contract with the general and your involvement with the homeowner yourself.
Good. Well, we are not having any other questions coming in, so I would like to thank you both. I think you've provided tremendously important information. For anyone that hasn't been able to jot down all the notes, I want you to know that in about 24 hours, you will get a link so that you can watch this again. And that'll be really helpful for you capturing some more information. If you have further questions, as Dan and Greg have said, feel free to contact them. They'll be happy to answer some questions. And, we are so pleased that you would take your time to share this information with our members. And Dan, you do have a very unique perspective. There aren't a lot of attorneys out there who have owned landscape companies that understand what these guys are going through guys and gals are going through day in and day out. So
When I was in law school, I'll never forget, I was plowing one morning in my suit because I was clerking.
Wish that was posted on Facebook.
That's a great story. So I would like to thank our sponsors as well. Greg Botson is one of them, of course, and he is definitely the insurance expert for people that are in the contracting business. So definitely give him a call. Dan, thank you. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Without you, as I said, we would not be able to do these types of programs. So thank you all. And we will see you on March 11th for Marvin Montgomery, The Power of Attitude. It'll be a great opportunity for you guys to get all of your employees around a computer screen or projected up on the wall somewhere to get them psyched for the new spring season coming up. So thank you, everybody. And
stay safe, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Great job.